Well, hello and welcome everyone to the fourth part of our Jesus Futures series, which is our 2022 virtual event series, where we've been exploring various contemporary issues and how they affect and how our Jesus scholars and community have been responding to them. It's my absolute delight to chair and host tonight's installment on the future of business. We're going to be joined tonight by Professors Kylie Vincent, Peter Eso, Renee Adams, and Dr. Pamela Walker. Unfortunately, Kylie is actually running a little bit late and sends her apologies. She hopes to join us slightly later in the event. But in the meantime, I will introduce our speakers and then get the conversation started. When Kylie arrives, Professor Kylie Vincent is Tutorial Fellow in Inorganic Chemistry at Jesus College. Her research interests are in biological chemistry and hydrogen energy, and how these can contribute to a more sustainable chemical industry. She is co-founder and non-executive director of the 2021 spin-out from University of Oxford Hydrogen, which is developing technologies to decarbonize biocatalysis for chemical manufacturing. In 2021, she was appointed as the university's first academic champion for women in entrepreneurship. She's an associate director of Oxford's Inorganic Chemistry for Future Manufacturing EPSRC Centre for Doctoral Training. Kylie was denoted the UK's Science and Technology Woman of the Future in 2011 and was the overall winner of the Royal Society of Chemistry's Emerging Technologies competition in 2013. Professor Peter Eso is an associate professor at the Economics Department and Tutorial Fellow at Jesus College. Before coming to Oxford in September 2009, he had academic positions at Northwestern University and MIT. His research is in microeconomic theory and game theory, and is currently writing papers on strategic situations, for example, bargaining and trading games, where information may be concealable, but when disclosed, verifiable. He teaches microeconomics, game theory, econometrics-related subjects. He has a PhD from Harvard from 2000 and an undergraduate degree from his native Hungary, and is also married with 3 children. Professor Renee Adams is a truly global scholar. Her work focuses on information flows on boards, bank governance, group decision-making, the governance of central banks, and gender diversity on and off boards. After receiving an MS in mathematics from Stanford University and a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago, she held positions at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the Stockholm School of Economics, the University of Queensland, and the University of New South Wales, and visiting positions in Germany, Italy, Japan, Norway, Sweden, and the US. She's a fellow of the European Corporate Governance Institute and a senior fellow at the Asian Bureau of Finance and Economic Research. Her global experience is reflected in the interdisciplinary nature of her research, which has been published in top accounting, economics, finance, and management journals. In 2019, Renee won the Female Career Award from HEC Lausanne. This award honors twice a year an outstanding female academic career outside HEC, and Renee won the first edition in 2019. Dr. Pamela Walker holds a DPhil in neuroscience here from Jesus in 2002 and is an alumna and a member of our Gen Network, and an executive MBA here from 2017. She was a college graduate scholar and was awarded the Forte Foundation Scholarship for Women. She is a partner at a management consulting firm, Gate One, heading up the life sciences business and the startup incubator. She also has a medtech investment firm, Thena Capital. Her career has focused on strategy consulting and investment within the medtech and life sciences sectors. She has worked with both investors, pharma, private equity and venture capital, and operators in pharma, health tech, medtech, medical devices, medical diagnostics, and CROs to optimize business growth and create a transformative impact on the lives of patients. So I'd like to join me in welcoming our wonderful panel for this evening on what is a incredibly bright Oxford day, I have to admit today. So on this bright day, I will begin with a question about the future. I think we all appreciate at the moment of all the headlines at the moment. Obviously, we've just come through the pandemic, and now with the situation, particularly in Ukraine, the major challenges that the world faces. So I suppose the first question, and I think I'll give this to Pamela. What are the challenges that businesses face in the future?
That's a very big question. I think you covered some of the global dynamics, and I'm certain that especially Peter can talk to some of those as well. I think there's some fundamental changes that are challenging business structures and business longevity and business sustainability. And I think a lot of it has to do with culture. And when I talk about culture, it's more around the expectation of employees to have a certain cultural experience. It's also the expectation of employees to stay in a business for a certain amount of time and then choose what they want to do and choose their path. And I think there have been a lot of shifts in terms of our expectation of the role of employment and businesses as fulfilling experiences across our longer and longer journeys that we're on. So I think a lot of it is shifting from the employee perspective as well, and is driving a change. And obviously there's an incredible global shift. And certainly we've seen, look, we're on Zoom tonight. We would have been all together. That would have forced us to all be in Oxford. I mean, this in and of itself has transformed the world. And then the expectations of what businesses can and can't do, crossing geographical boundaries. So we kind of have the internal pull of expectations and then pushing out across the different boundaries that causes a massive shift in expectations and in scalability. I'd love to get Peter's thoughts, because I think this is more Peter's domain as well, understanding the economic dynamics and the markets and what they're driving in terms of shifting businesses.
Peter is me, Peter, right?
Yeah, this Peter. Sorry, you, Peter.
Okay, I thought a little bit about this in advance, but not too much. We were told not to prepare explicitly too much. So I Googled it. I found that various expert websites offer 6 to 33 challenges that businesses will face in the future. I found them somewhat boring. They were talking about, I mean, there's some very insightful. You know, you need to worry about or maintain reputation or your brand. You should keep your customers, employees, profitability. And I started to think, you know, what experience I have in this, and I have two kinds. As an academic, I'm kind of like an entrepreneur. I have to sell my papers to journals and my fellow academics, and I think that adaptation is the most important thing, and you never know what the next big idea is, and you have to adjust your activities to it, so to be adaptable. And I guess there's a more significant regulatory environment for firms than for academics. Our world doesn't change that quickly, but we are also exposed to like social changes. For instance, you know, what you can do research, or what you can what do other people find interesting. And another aspect in which I have some experience, but I'm a bit worried because I see other people on this call among the audience who have way more experience, because I recognize names. That I sat on the finance or investment estates committee of the college for, I think, 8 years, and there you know, that I saw some trade-offs, that we cannot really please all stakeholders all the time. You don't want to alienate students when you choose investments. You don't want to alienate potential future donors. You also don't want to waste money. So all kinds of considerations came up, and we pay a lot of external expertise to find a good solution. So again, I concluded that I need to pick one thing that is the biggest challenge is so adaptation and navigating social perceptions while staying in business. I think there are fewer and fewer businesses that can say that the business of business is business, and I think that's probably the biggest challenge. But I yield the floor to more experienced people.
Well, I think that was a really interesting point, particularly about that idea that we all are engaged with business, the college community, and the thought of academia as business as well. Renee, do you have anything to add, particularly with your particular international perspective, to the challenges that are facing business at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you learn from living in different countries is how important culture is. And this also relates in some sense to academia. You know, I've been at many different institutions, and you can see that culture matters a lot. And I think this is also something that Pamela mentioned. I think culture is really where the key challenges lie in dealing with culture, society culture, and business culture, and how the two interact. So these, I think, are really important and really challenging to deal with, because people don't recognize their importance as much as I think they should.
Absolutely. And I think the obviously one of the great challenges that faces the world at the moment, of course, is the threat of climate change and environmental sustainability of businesses. Pamela, if I put this question back to you, how should business cope with the climate crisis and with this existential problem that's facing us all in our lives, as well as that of business?
Yeah, I mean, this is an enormously important topic for businesses. And I guess, I mean, you did my introduction, so everyone knows that I have a life sciences and med tech sector lens, and that sector is very highly regulated. So the lens through which I look at ESG is through the life sciences sector. But I do then explore the other sectors. Where can we, gain inspiration from? Because I think really, we need to think about ESG in three key ways for businesses. The first is specifically around setting the strategy. So how do you set the strategy? The second is around, well, then how do you operationalize the strategy? And then the third is really listening to whatever your pull is from the market, be it investors or consumers. And I think in terms of the first point, setting the strategy, that really starts with ESG being on the leader's agenda. It absolutely has to be core to their agenda. And as we know, CEOs and people in very senior leadership positions in corporations are doing shorter and shorter stints. So it needs to be on their agenda with some key objectives for that short stint. And I would say in life sciences, it really isn't as much as it should be, or it isn't as often as it should be. And certainly as a sector, it's lagging behind the consumer sectors. I think one of the reasons for this is the regulatory complication that is really on the agenda. And then they've been looking at ESG in more of an old-fashioned way around reputation or around pricing. But really the world has moved on in terms of the expectations of what ESG actually is. And I've certainly seen some really fascinating learnings that some of the large pharma are taking from the consumer sector. So for example, pharma companies have blister packages. Danone has a really amazing sustainable packaging solution that I know pharma companies are looking to adapt. Obviously, there's complications in supply chain, but that's sort of one way. And I recently read something about Diageo has these really incredible new sustainable bottles. Certainly that's something that pharma can adapt as well, but it's effortful. It's effortful to find out about it and then to create the right supply chain to be able to operationalize it, which is really the next point. Is it's great to have a strategy. It's great for it to be on the agenda, but if you don't have the right target operating model for your business to execute, if you don't have the right governance to make the right decisions around it, and if you don't have the right processes in place to really roll it out, it's not going to happen. So that's really key. And then just the last point I wanted to mention was, with large corporations to move, there has to be some sort of pull from the market. And on the consumer side, we've seen an enormous pull in terms of expectations around sustainability from consumers. In life sciences, the pull is more coming from the investors. ESG and sustainability is really on the investor agenda. And so that's pulling it to the forefront and pushing it up to the leadership agenda. But I think definitely to be able to develop sustainable business, environmentally sustainable businesses, you have to have that sort of strategy, the operationalizing and the pull from what I've seen.
Absolutely. And can I just ask a very specific question just came to my mind as you mentioned that? So obviously the big elephant in the room in the future still is COVID. Obviously a lot of things through COVID were disposable products. Masks, for instance, do you think that will continue into the future? People will be then having got people to a sense of using reusable things, reusable cups, trying to be more environmentally conscious. Suddenly, COVID comes along, and a lot of these things are disposable plastics. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is a challenge going forward, or do you think we will, in the new normal, return to having that environmental focus and going back to reusables?
I think we'll go to reusables, but what those reusables will be from that medical standpoint will be different because, as I just mentioned, they're not there yet for their supply chain to have everything sterile, to have everything of the medical grade that it needs to be. It's a long process. So just you identify a producer and a manufacturer, it could take 3 years to actually get that into an individual's possession. So I absolutely think we're going to see all of that becoming more sustainable, but it's not necessarily the cloth masks versus the sort of single-use masks that we see now. I think there'll be a different solution.
Absolutely. And Renee or Peter, do you have anything you want to add on particularly on the topic of the environment, this sort of issue that is, I suppose, hangs over all aspects of life, but particularly in the way that we will do business in the future?
I guess, Peter, did you want to say something, or?
You go first. I shouldn't always come before you.
All right. Yeah, I think picking up on one of the things that Pamela mentioned, I think it is very important. I think a problem right now is people seem to think that there's easy fixes. And there's a lot of discussion about like ESG metrics and, how, if you do more ESG, then that leads to higher shareholder value and all these things. And then the things that people are measuring, I think, if it were that easy, then people would have done it earlier, right? So I think people are thinking about these things a bit too simplistically. So I think in terms of what Pamela was saying, like you have to actually sit down and think about these things pretty. These are hard problems, and people have to recognize that they're hard, and also that it's going to be costly to enact change, right? And changing behavior is always very difficult. I mean, if we pick up on the theme of culture, culture takes a long time to change, changing people's habits. I mean, these things, these are hard. So I think, what's very important, or I would imagine any successful business and also a successful investor would recognize that people who advocate quick fixes are probably not going down the right path, right?
Maybe if I can say something from an econ theory's perspective. I'm not a practitioner at all. So what we teach is that these environmental issues are profoundly, the issue is that there's a lack of markets. Certain effects are not tradable. Pollution is not tradable, or like a carbon buildup in the atmosphere used not to be tradable, and we advocate for more trade, more markets, but then we also recognize all the limitations that the political economy of it, that politicians don't necessarily implement these things in the theoretically pure way, and then they could cause more trouble than what these markets resolve. And then there are trade-offs everywhere. It turns out that free trade lengthens supply chains, and then that has negative externalities. So indeed, to be aware of these trade-offs, to be aware of the externalities, and very often it is a push from society that changes perceptions. In my lifetime, or in the last 5 years, the change from fossil fuel powered cars to everybody wanting to drive electric cars, and then that's kind of society's needs, is it's remarkable. So I wouldn't be necessarily pessimistic about these things. Inventiveness of businesses will be key.
Fantastic, thank you. And just to move on to another great challenge, obviously, face the world today is ideas of diversity in business. I'm going to turn to Renee first this time. How do you think we can promote greater diversity, especially across boards, executives, and founders of businesses, really at the top of the business structures?
Sorry, what, promote greater diversity, or? Yes,
sort of greater diversity in terms of gender and ethnic background in particular, but particularly at the top of businesses, on boards, executives, founders of businesses as well.
Yeah, so I think I have sort of an unconventional answer to this. So I think the standard way that people think you should promote diversity is just appoint more diverse people, right? That as being the best way to promote diversity. So I really think that we should be focusing more on de-biasing organizations. And the reason that I think de-biasing is important is because I think, to the extent that we have underrepresentation of people with certain types of characteristics at the top of the corporate ladder, I think this is a governance problem. And so essentially, if there's discrimination, that's a governance problem. And so how do you solve these governance problems? You have to sort of take a hard look at your governance processes and say, well, where in the appointment process is the bias creeping in? And if you address the overall process, then that will allow you to sort of act bias-free to any sort of characteristic. So whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's you name it, right? So I don't think like policies where you say, well, let's just have like a quota for women on boards, and then next year we're going to have a quota for something else, and then next year we're going to have a quota for something else. I don't think those kinds of policies are necessarily the most productive, because they don't actually address the problems. The problems are organizational, and you need to fix the organizational problems, not just put more people on the boards with a certain characteristic.
What would be, I suppose, your top tip to improve sort of like organizational governance? So is there a particular, what would you recommend saying to improve business in that sense?
So I think, well, as a scientist, I always believe in measurement, right? So I think it's very good if you keep track of what's going on, right? So if you, for example, you want to hire for a position, right? Keep track of who's applied for the position, who gets the interview slot, who doesn't get the interview slot, who gets the second interview. And, if you keep track of these things, after a while, you start to notice patterns, right? And so I think data is important, but I also think issues of transparency are really important, right? So if positions are advertised, to advertise them widely, make sure that people know what the processes are. So I think, essentially good governance is about being transparent and being accountable. And I think if you have data, you can be accountable. And if you have transparency, then people know what the game is. And I think those are really important sort of principles to have in order to ensure that there's no sort of systematic biases.
At this stage, delighted to say, I won't just notice has joined us. Welcome, Kylie Vincent, who's joining us now. Actually, I think, so to put you on the hot spot as soon as you arrive, but I think particularly with your role as the university's first academic champion of women in business, we're just discussing issues of representation and diversity at the top of businesses, particularly on boards and founders. What would you say maybe George, a little bit about your role actually now as the university champion for this particular area, and how that is hoping to affect positive change within the university's business culture?
Yeah, sure. And I'm very sorry about joining late. It's slightly difficult timing, this one, as far as getting children settled, ready to stay quiet while this is on. So I'm very sorry about being late joining. So I guess I'm a chemist, and but also interested in taking science discovery through to commercialization, and we spun out a company from our own research last year in the sort of biotech for cleaner chemical manufacturing area. So but I guess sort of off the back of that, the university appointed me as the first academic champion for women in entrepreneurship last year. And this role was created really recognizing that although we as a university have done well in increasing numbers of women in increasingly senior academic positions in the university, we haven't done as well in getting women equally represented as founders and co-founders of our spin-out companies coming from the university. And we actually have very poor data at the moment. And so one of the big issues has been around data gathering so that we understand better what the diversity is amongst our founders and co-founders and the boards of our spin-outs and so on. But an inferred gender analysis of spin-outs thus far has suggested we've got about 17% women as founders or co-founders of spin-outs. And we don't even know the data on other areas of diversity in our founders. So an advisory board on diversity and entrepreneurship that I chair has recommended that we double that in 5 years up to 33%, which on the one hand sounds, I guess we've had quite a lot of pushback saying that's not ambitious enough. But on the other hand, when you think about it, this is not just sort of women appointed onto boards. This is women who are actually taking innovations from their research right through to spinning out a company or licensing a technology or starting a social enterprise venture. And so this is really I think is going to be quite a challenge, because it needs sort of support along that whole entrepreneurial pipeline, from sort of the earliest stages of having an innovation right through to commercialization. So I guess that's sort of the background to the role that I have in the university there.
Fantastic. And I wonder if I bring in Pamela at this stage as a female partner in a management consulting firm. How have you noticed the culture in the firms where you've worked in terms of particularly gender equality at the top of those businesses?
I think this is a really interesting topic. I'm actually the only female partner in the management consultancy, and we're the fastest growing management consultancy in the UK. It's really high performing. We have a really great culture. As you mentioned, I also head up the incubator, which is part of our employee value proposition. So it's a really great business. And I think, to Renee's point, actually, we are doing a lot of work to de-bias across the organization, because we're really keen to increase diversity at the board level. And I think the way I sort of see it, and I think this is in line with what Renee was saying, but also I think what Kylie shared was a really lovely illustration of this, that you need to have an organization-wide strategy. Talking about putting more women on boards is a tactic for which you can have a KPI, but that's just one tactic. It's not your overarching strategy to really have a better, more inclusive business. And I'm sure Kylie knows the data better than I do, but I think the latest data on female-founded startups is that female-founded startups have double the amount of revenue than male-founded startups, but they get less than 1% of the funding for their startups, even though the data shows that their revenue is twice as much as male-founded startups, and they do more with less, and they make faster decisions, and. So there's a lot of really strong data, but I think it is about supporting the entire journey of women in businesses. And one of the great tactics I've seen has been equal parent leave or equal family leave. When there's a baby or there's been an adoption, that men and women have the same sort of parental leave policy. That has created the most equity within a firm that I've noticed. So that's just a little bit of my observations.
Fantastic. And I wonder if how do you think the pandemic will affect this business? Obviously, does virtual working, that sort of flexibility maybe aid, particularly in terms of parental leave? Do you think that might be a way forward as well?
I think flexibility helps everyone, and I think it certainly will help women. So, like Kylie, I have little children I can hear in the background. They have to go to, luckily they're at school, but they have to get to school, and someone has to pick them up from school. And it's lovely to have that flexibility to be able to work around it, because I think we're all, as parents and as employees and workers and thinkers, keen to do our best. Everyone is showing up each day keen to do their best. And so the more flexibility we can have in our schedules and still be accountable is wonderful. But that brings me back to the point I made on KPIs and accountability, because that's super, super important. The less visibility you have of what people are doing, the more you do need to have accountability frameworks to make sure that businesses can run functionally.
Absolutely. And so I suppose to the function business, in terms of the finance business, to bring Peter in at this point, how do you think the sort of global finances at the moment will affect businesses in the future? What are the what's the economic forecast, I suppose, from your perspective?
I have to preface it that I'm not a macroeconomist, I'm not a forecaster. My perception of what's going on is that in the last few years, it looked like money is cheap, and when people forecast the future interest rates, then very often, like, everything is always negative, and there was just no investment opportunities, and everybody got free money, and it looks like this changed almost overnight, right? So now central banks are going to raise interest rates. Money is not going to be cheap. I think what's most important is for a financial sector to have products that again help adaptability. All the interesting products. I don't want to bore anybody with details, but like options or contingent convertibles that work when that becomes unsustainable, then it converts into equity. COCOs, the conditional convertibles. These are great inventions. They are also somewhat dangerous. It's like a nuclear power that it can also melt things down. So what the forecast is, I think that on the call, there are more experienced people than me. I'm not going to say their names, but they recognize probably themselves, not just on the panel, but I see the audience. And so I don't know that much. I think money is going to be more expensive now, it seems. And I think the value of these financial instruments is going to go up. That's all I can say.
Although that's absolutely fascinating. I think just because I'm aware that Renee has to leave us at 1:45, I want to, because I go on to our last point before I open up the floor, because I think as I preface this conversation with, there is a lot that's worrying in the news of the world. There's a lot of anxiety. But the last question I'd like to ask each of you, and I'll begin with Renee, is what are your hopes for the future? Where's the glimmer of sunshine? Or you can see quite a lot of sunshine currently on my face, but what are the glimmers of sunshine in the world for you and for business at the moment? So starting with Renee.
One. What's my hope? My hope is that people will have the courage to make hard calls, even if there's temporary, even if maybe they have to sacrifice profits in the short run. So I think that's really, addressing inequality, addressing environmental problems, and you have to be able to have the courage to stay the course and do what you think is right. So I guess that's my hope.
Fantastic. And actually, I'm going to bound back to Peter, because actually when Peter, when we were discussing this talk, it said immediately that he was an optimist. So Peter, do you want to give us some of your rays of optimism?
I think there's an evolutionary selection for the optimists to survive, right? So it must be that we are all optimists, so we are all more confident in our abilities than we really are. There are all kinds of psychological experiments where people are asked, how confident are you that you know the correct answer? And then everybody is super overconfident, because otherwise you just don't survive if you are not an optimist. So there might be a bias here, but also historically, I think every generation so far, apart from a few, maybe those who lived through the Little Ice Age or World War, they were directly affected. Typically, generations lived better than previous ones. I think humans are super inventive, very adaptive. I think the biggest dangers are also man-made, right? Nuclear war, or more esoteric like AI taking over. If it hasn't, we don't know. But I think that overall, most of these problems, one takeaway from COVID that I think people didn't appreciate at the time, like how quickly vaccines were invented. I found it amazing that within a year there was hope. I think when humanity faces like an existential threat that is well defined, then humanity can respond. I also, I have bigger children than Kylie and Pam seem to, and I sometimes look at them. I see them in the park with their friends, and I'm reassured. Became a bit pathetic in the pathos in all kinds of ways. I let others talk as well. But yeah, I'm an optimist.
Fantastic. Kylie, what's your ray of hope for us?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you talked about before I joined, but I guess coming back to the sort of diversity points and picking up on what Pam was talking about, I think that there, in trying to achieve diversity in companies, it's not only for the sake of doing it, it really is because we benefit from that diversity of thinking and a range of different perspectives. And so I think we can see the culture of business changing in the future. We can see things, real benefits coming from having a real diverse set of minds coming together on boards and sort of more diverse ideas brought forward towards market. So I think that's one area. Obviously, there's the big crisis facing all of us is climate crisis, and business is going to have to deal with that. But again, we can make positives of that, and it will change the way that we do things. But we need to be, but I guess that will have a big impact on sort of where business is going in the future. And I think we can see some exciting initiatives coming through in that area. There's one I wanted to mention, that there's a that I came across recently called Chapter Zero, and a startup coming from Somerville zoology alumna Julia Badley, where she's developed this company to educate company directors about how their company can take net zero seriously. And there's now over 200 FTSE 350 companies who are have members of this Chapter Zero. And I think that's like a really exciting demonstration of where, particularly with a link to Oxford, but where that sort of initiative can really make change in how boards think. And so both the diversity and the sort of energy, climate, sustainability issues, on the one hand, are huge challenges, but on the other hand, can really bring positive change and new ways of thinking.
Fantastic. And Pam, do you want to finish off this section before I throw it open to our audience with your ray of hope? And just as a quick word to audience, if you want to drop some questions in the chat box, I'll start fielding them once we've heard from Pam.
Sure. Well, I mean, wow, I think everything has been covered. I wholeheartedly share Kylie's perspective. I think diversity is going to fuel the future in lots of different ways. And the ESG agenda is so important, which I talked about before. I guess the other thing that I think will be fantastic, and it's actually something that I think businesses can learn from longstanding academic institutions and academic models like Oxford's, is having an expectation of longer careers, of having people in the workforce for longer, because we will be living longer and we are living longer. I read a stat that if you're in your 40s in 2025, you'll probably live to 120, because that's where healthcare innovation is going to take us. But what does that mean for your life in the workforce? What does that mean for your career? What does that mean for your contribution? What does that mean in terms of expectations that businesses can have for their employees? I think this is so exciting because I think it means that we give value in lots of different ways. And I also think this sort of depressurizes and de-risks the whole maternity leave conundrum that women face in their 30s. So I'm really excited to see this longevity in careers start to take shape.
Fantastic. Thank you. And whilst our audience think of some questions, I thought I'll fire away a quick last one that's on the back of that. What would you say, particularly, let's say in the college context, one of our undergrads comes to you with an exciting business idea that they want to develop. What would you tell them? What will be the first piece of advice you'd give? Kylie, do you want to take that one first?
Well, I guess there's some very practical things in the university. So there's sort of practical support from the Oxford Angel Fund. That's an angel investment fund specifically aimed at alumni ventures. There's a lot of experience amongst the alumni community, both in the college but in the university. I guess there's the Jesus Entrepreneurs Network, where they should be making great connections there, but also entrepreneurial networks for alumni for the whole university as well. And I would duck out for a second.
I will. I'll just add on the back of Kylie's comment there. If you are interested and don't know about our Jesus Entrepreneur Network, it's a fantastic professional development network. We have it in college. If you are interested in joining, please do drop us a message in the development office, and we can put you in touch with all our entrepreneurs who've come through college. And delighted to hear from you. Pam, do you want to take off from where Kylie had of what would you tell one of our undergrads who comes to you saying they have a business idea?
Well, so I head up an incubator. So lots of people come to me and say they have business ideas. What do I say to them? I say it's amazing. If you have the passion and the drive, you can do anything you put your mind to. It's probably not going to be that idea, but you can totally do something if you want to do something. And I definitely think in with my investment hat on, and something that I learned from the business school at Oxford is that you back the jockey, not the horse, because it's not necessarily going to be that initial idea that's the product. But if you have a founder that's passionate, that's diligent, that has a good team, that has a sense of all the different elements that go into a business, then you'll be a success. But I think I would also say, listen, have empathy, be curious, because I see a lot of companies, rightly so, the startups are very, very product focused. And then they do a really great pre-seed investment round in consumer, and they're going to commercialize, or seed in medtech, and they're going to commercialize. And they don't have that go-to-market awareness or understanding of what the consumer really wants. So I would say bake in the consumer from the outset.
Fantastic. And Kylie, now you're back. Did you have anything else you wanted to add from before?
Sorry about that.
No, please don't apologize at all.
Well, I think I guess wanted to finish by saying, really just sort of use this amazing network that we've got within Oxford, because there's so many people who've gone there before you and have sort of trodden this path. So there's plenty of people to share their experiences along the way. And I guess these kind of networks really help to bring together people to share those kind of experiences. So yeah, I think you're in a great place if you're doing this in this kind of Oxford melting pot of ideas and sort of support for innovation.
Fantastic. And Peter, you must, I don't know if you might get this more than others as from our economics and management course.
This happened in the past. I told them to go for it. And indeed, I should have given more kind of useful advice. For instance, to go to the business school and take advantage of these incubators and the spaces that are officially provided. Yeah, I think we are all supportive of these things, and I really not much to add. I think I should just listen to questions now.
Well, we have one in the chat box from Fasayo. With regards to diversity, inclusion, and gender equity, which was a topic we've discussed during this conversation, a lot of actions seem to be directed at what management/founders can do. What is the role of younger colleagues or employees in driving this? Pam, do you want to tell us a bit what you think about this question?
I mean, from my perspective, I would take a similar view to the one I shared around ESG. And sort of the key element of the market pull. And I think definitely in this instance, having a pull around the expectations, especially if the younger cohort is farther away from the management team that's making the decisions and needs more influence. I think definitely creating the pull, creating the demand, taking initiative. Don't wait for them to do it because it might not even be on their radar. So I would say, create the change you want to see.
Fantastic. And Kylie, do you have anything to add on that one?
I guess just to add that I sort of don't be afraid to pull up management if you think things are not being done well as far as encouraging diversity, because I think there's a lot of willingness at management level. Like generally, there's very few sort of managers who are saying we don't want diversity, but there is not necessarily the knowledge of exactly what needs to be done to get more diverse representation. Also, just sort of being role models, being, even if you're a reasonably junior employee, you'll have people who are even more junior than you coming through the pipeline. So be there as role models and just sort of peer mentors to people coming through to just help that whole pipeline through, I guess. Yeah.
Fantastic. We actually have a comment. It's like just in the chat, not a question, but it's someone who says, as a female director in the Netherlands, we have a significant proportion of men who begin part-time working to enable them to share childcare. This is more ongoing than paternity leave balance alone. I mean, do you think we can look particularly to maybe practices in Europe and the rest of the world as a way of improving our practices in the UK? Sorry, if anyone wants to pick up on that or... but no, I think that sounds fantastic.
I think it is changing, isn't it? We're starting to I'm noticing amongst my own research team in the university that men are starting to take more of a role in taking longer periods of paternity leave, shared paternity leave. But I think we are probably behind countries like the Netherlands and some of the Scandinavian countries in sort of treating that equally. And I think that's certainly something that we can learn from.
There's a question from Angela to the panel. Do the panels see the current prospects of globalism and how to hedge that with resilience of homegrown energy sources and raw materials? Pam, I think this is on to the environmental angle.
I'm not an energy expert, and I understand this question because I know a lot of energy experts. So this is a very complicated question, and I'm not experienced enough to be able to comment on it. But I know that all of those trends are going to be the future. That will be part of a whole host of things that we need to do, because we can't rely on the sources we're currently relying on.
And if I can just jump in on an aspect of that as well, I think it's something that the early stages of the pandemic really threw up, our reliance on imported pharmaceuticals, for example. So even simple molecules like paracetamol, we were suddenly running out of at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think that's one of the interesting opportunities for, as well as challenges for future business, that sort of reshoring some of that manufacturing and processing of raw materials in the UK. And then the sort of energy availability is also tied to the sustainability of energy. So we have great resources in the UK in wind power and coastlines for wave power and so on. We might not be so great on the solar front, but we have plenty of wind power available if we can harness that. And so that sort of environmental sustainability is also very much tied up with the UK having more resilience in terms of that. But I think certainly in the chemical sector that I'm most aware of, there's a real drive towards trying to reshore the manufacturing of some of these chemicals that we should be able to manufacture in the UK, but we've sort of lost that, but suddenly realized that we do need to be able to do that in-house.
Fantastic. And Peter, I wonder if I could come to you first with the next question, a question from Bob. Changes in the nature of business in recent years, tech, globalization, have polarized wealth and income. Assuming this trend cannot continue indefinitely, is it down to business or government to fix this?
I wonder how business can fix it. Right. So I think income inequalities, taxation typically is the monopoly of fixing income inequality, and social interventions is the monopoly of the government. I guess there could be innovative solutions like connecting donors to those who need money, so that there's charity and maybe technology can help in that. I also know of some innovative ways of giving, right? But I think the kind of profound issues, certainly government has a role to play in this type of regulation. I also wanted to, the previous question, I had one thought, if I could add, because I fully agreed with what Kylie said about the fragility of these supply chains, and that's a reason to, see the limits of globalization. And also, we also learned that it also makes regulation much less effective if you don't control the territory where things come from, right? So whether some raw materials are tainted with blood, or we export carbon footprint by not being able to control how certain things are produced abroad. So there are multiple reasons for seeing limits of globalization and for business to grow for this type of local sourcing. But I'd be curious to hear what others think, or what the audience think of for instance, is income inequality, how to resolve it, or what?
Kylie, do you think business or government? Where do you think the responsibility lies?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not really an expert at that sort of level of things, but I guess in increase, certainly from the sort of environmental sustainability, businesses sort of realizing that they need to clean up the Sustainability Act of again, I guess, sort of thinking of the chemical manufacturing in particular. Chemical industry has quite a bad reputation in terms of sort of pollution and so on. And there's been a real drive to clean up some of that, the sort of image of the chemical industry, and clean up the sort of waste streams coming out of chemical manufacturing, and cleaner ways of chemical manufacturing. And I guess that's being driven by consumers wanting that as much as it is by regulation. So I think it's a bit at both ends that, you know, we can demand that we want cleaner, more efficient processes, and sort of pressure industry to do that. But we, you know, that I think there is a role for regulation as well. So a bit of both.
Fantastic. And Pam, do you have a view on business or government?
No, I was going to say sort of the same thing that Kylie said at the end, a bit of both. There, you need that pull, but you need that governance as well.
Fantastic. Well, we might have time for one further question if anyone wants to pose one. But in the meantime, I'll just let you know that the next Jesus Futures will be the future of education, another area we sort of have touched upon in terms of the future. And then environment will be back in terms of food, nutrition, sustainability with Susan Jebb on the 16th of June. So do put those dates in your diary. But as there's nothing next to the chat box, it just remains to be, oh, sorry, we do. Angela has one more question for us. She asks, can more transparency rules on labeling of sources help for restoring of domestic manufacturing? I don't. Any of the panel want to take this one?
Well, I guess it's a great suggestion. I mean, we don't know much at all when we buy all sorts of things, where they've been made, and we're doing a lot of sort of in the manufacturing chains, bits of products being done in one country and then shipped to somewhere else for the next part of the manufacturing chain and so on. So sort of having more of an understanding of that would definitely be helpful in allowing consumers to make sensible decisions about, you know, and to vote with our wallets, I suppose, as far as sort of choosing products that have lower carbon miles and lower all sorts of things. So that's a great idea. Again, that comes from the government end, doesn't it, in terms of regulation and labeling, but it seems to be a good idea.
Peter, do you want to come in on this?
I have something mildly relevant to say. In economics, in the last, 10, 15 years, behavioral economics was a big deal. I'm a kind of a mainstream game theorist, so I like to explain things with rational means, maybe lack of information, but not ad hoc explanations. So I'm just prefacing it that okay. So one of the concepts was to nudge consumers to do certain things by putting broccoli first on the kids' menu at school. I know from my children doesn't work. I mean, might work once, but then they taste it next time they go for the burger. And so the alternative is boost. So that in response to nudge came the idea of boost. Actually came from, I think, Swedish philosophers are pushing this idea that they give people more information, like find out that it gives you high cholesterol and that's why you should eat broccoli, because that doesn't. And so I guess also with strengthening home industries, if people have more information and they realize that we see all kinds of shop signs that support your local shopkeeper, buy stuff here, not on Amazon, and if you learn how much pollution certain things generate. I mean, it's difficult to measure, but if you do more effort, I'm sure it's going to lead to better decisions.
Fantastic.
I guess we've got an interesting case study of that sort of labeling question with the restaurants starting to bring in list of the calorie count on all of the items on the menus, and it will be interesting to see how that changes consumer behavior. So I'm sure there'll be some academic studies into how that kind of labeling affects behavior and purchasing choices and so on. So
absolutely. And I just comment from Bob in the chat. If we leave it mainly to government to fix it, the main beneficiaries will be lawyers who get paid for finding ways around it. Does it need to be taken on board by business as well?
I guess that comes back to the bit of both.
And it also speaks to this, all of these great ideas that economists or non-economists or businessmen might think up. There's always the political economy of it, or where is the inelastic supply, where rents are going to be captured. That's a wise comment, clearly.
Fantastic. Well, I think on that note, as the bells I think have just chimed of our chapel clock here in college, to thank Pam, Kylie, and Peter, and also Renee in her absence. And thank you all audience for joining us on what is absolutely certainly here in Oxford, as you can see from my camera, an absolutely gorgeously sunny day. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you'll tune in to our next Jesus Futures, and also look out for your inboxes on Saturday when our next in-person event goes on sale, just in time for Shakespeare's birthday. So look out for your inboxes, particularly if you're interested in questions of gender. Our new production of The Taming of the Shrew will be going on sale. So I hope you can join us I can't guarantee it will be as sunny in college, but let's hope, fingers crossed. But thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you for another college event soon. Thank you so much. Goodbye.